Hello and welcome to Niche References, where I yap about my niche interests so that I don't annoy my friends and family with them. My name is Chris, and today I'm going to be continuing my series on The Genius by yapping about the players from Season 1, Rules of the Game. I'm currently in the middle of a Genius rewatch, and I've already ranked the main matches from Season 1, so definitely go check that out if you're interested. The link will be below. Today I'm going to be ranking the players of Season 1, which I found very difficult in comparison to the main match ranking. I don't have a strict criteria for the players like I did for the main matches, but I tried to balance their social game, strategic game, and my own personal bias. I think this ended up being a much more subjective ranking in comparison to the main matches, but I also think that's fitting because I don't know about you, but I have much stronger emotional ties to these players than I do to the games that they played. Before we jump into my ranking, I should also note that these rankings are based solely on this season. Any subsequent seasons that these players appear on will be ranked and discussed accordingly when those seasons appear, so I'm not going to be spoiling any later seasons of The Genius in this ranking. But I will be spoiling the entirety of Season 1, so definitely don't listen any further if you haven't seen the entire season. Enough yapping, onto the list. Coming in last place is, unfortunately, Minso. There are at least two other players I wish I could put in last place instead of her, but I couldn't logic myself into allowing them to be last because she fumbled the bag so badly at nearly every turn. In the 1-2-3 game, knowing that there are an odd number of cards, your absolute first priority above winning, above getting points, should be to get rid of your cards by any means necessary. Someone's always going to have a card left over, don't let it be you. The fact that Minso has 3 cards left over when everyone else has used all of theirs is inconceivable. Girly, what are you doing? To her credit, she plays a part in the Garnet heist, even if she is just the middleman with Sangmin as the mastermind. But then in the election game, she once again fumbles by continuing to pretend to be loyal to Jinho's side when it's not strategically beneficial to do that anymore. And because of that, she earns their ire and is chosen for the death match. Based on her showing in these 2 episodes, I have very little faith in her ability to hold her own in any of these games, and that's why she unfortunately lands in last place. Second to last, and one of the players I wish I could have put last, it's Jimmy Cha. Teacher Cha, Cha Minsu, Cha Sangmin, whatever you want to call him. I know that some people find him endearing, but I find him to be a particularly frustrating presence in the season because of how much he impedes interesting gameplay. The one thing I will say to his credit, he has a great social game. For the 3 episodes he's there, he has so many of the other players eating out of the palm of his hand as he feeds them a straightforward path to safety. Not victory, safety. And it's so boring. I quake in fear at the thought of how monotonous and straightforward the season might have become if he was not eliminated when he was. I was always rooting for Sunggyu in that deathmatch against him, and let's all be glad in hindsight that it turned out the way it did. I appreciate him for the mentoring role he played while he was there, and I'm very grateful he got cut when he did. Next up in 11th place is Junseok. I couldn't really justify allowing him to get any higher on the list given that he's the first boot. Despite being the first boot, I do think that he showed a decent level of strategic ability in the brief time he was there, both in the first episode and when he returns as a member of the panel in the finale. His strategy with Jinho in the 1-2-3 game would have been the winning strategy if they had executed it properly, and that on its own shows a level of game sense above both Teacher Cha and Minso, which is why I put him above them. But he was clearly not able to integrate himself socially and was seen as somewhat of a strategic threat, and he was taken out immediately. And apart from all that, there's not much more to discuss given that he was only there for 1 episode and then promptly eliminated. Here we go, 10th place. It's Jungmoon. Jungmoon is another person I find frustrating. In terms of her gameplay, I cannot look past her performance in the zombie game. I think it's perhaps the single biggest fumble any player has in a main match all season. Changyop, her closest ally, begs her to be honest with him so that he can work with her, and she refuses, over and over and over. At a certain point, she needed to just recognize that she was caught and trust her ally to help her because he clearly wanted to. But she refused to trust him and told the clumsiest, flimsiest lies possible, which obviously led him to not trust her and jump ship, because he knew that she was lying to him and refused to trust him. And then when it's time for the deathmatch, who does she choose? Her closest ally, who begged her to let him help her. So even if she survives into the next episode, she's lost her one ally and has a much worse chance of winning. It's baffling gameplay that frustrates me every time I watch it. I don't understand what she was doing here. Outside of the zombie game, she wasn't a totally abysmal player, but she wasn't that great either, and she's definitely not someone I vibed with or liked watching very much. In 9th place, we have Jungmoon's aforementioned ally, Changyup. Unlike Jungmoon, I really wanted to bump him higher on the list, but I couldn't quite justify it. He wasn't there for long, but I do think he showed a decent amount of promise while he was on the show. In the 1-2-3 game, he was the one who took Teacher Cha's simple strategy a level deeper to ensure 4 wins for himself and Jungmoon instead of 3. Certainly not mind-blowing strategy, but it at least shows his ability to look for deeper solutions to the games. He was also socially well integrated into the group with ties to both Gura's alliance and the big Hero Alliance. Whether you think he earned it or not, he got immunity for 2 of the 4 episodes he was there for, and a week of safety is a week of safety. And to be honest, he really shouldn't have been in danger when he was. Usually the ideal place to be is the ally of the person chosen for the deathmatch, because if they're being logical, they're not going to choose you for the deathmatch. But Jungmoon chose violence at every turn on episode 4 and picked him anyway. He also showed a lot of promise when he returned for the finale as one of the only players who really seemed to catch on to how Gyolhap worked. I just really think that his is the biggest story of lost potential and what could have been with season 1, and I think we lost him before his time. I flip-flopped the next 2 players a couple of times, but ultimately landed in this order with Yuram placing 8th because I think she's the more passive player between the 2 of them. I see Yuram as a very consistent and safe player, and I think her biggest boon is her social game. Apart from election game, Yuram is usually safely insulated within the majority for the main matches, and she uses those bonds to advance her in the game. That said, I don't see her as a player with a ton of agency. She almost always relies on players like Kyungran and Sangmin to be the strategic leaders, and when we see that crumble, like in Scamming Horse Race, she kinda doesn't know what to do with herself except beg her allies to help her. I think she's consistently shown as a competent player with a decent mind for strategy, but she isn't always able to translate that into successful gameplay. She goes to 3 death matches throughout the season, which I believe puts her in a tie for most death matches, and all 3 of those were from her losing the main match, not being picked as the opponent. Also, I'm personally not a fan of her strategy for choosing deathmatch opponents. Garnets are nice, but I'm always picking the person I think I can beat, not the one with the most garnets. Garnets are useless for me if I'm not in the game anymore. I'll get them when I win the game anyway. Next up is the player that I was flip-flopping with Yuram, and that is Eunji. Eunji was a player I didn't think much of on a first watch, but I've really warmed to her over the years. I placed her higher than Yuram because I think that she's a very self-interested, active player who's willing to be a free agent and seems to really enjoy playing the games and getting into the strategy, even if she isn't always the best strategist. She has a bold personality that I think didn't always go over very well for her in comparison to some of the more demure women on the cast. Thanks, misogyny. And that's perhaps why she was not one of the more insulated players socially. But all these aspects are things that I really enjoy and respect about her. My struggle with Eunji isn't even something that's her fault. I think it's actually the editing's fault. The Genius is a show where we're usually shown a narrative of a game from a specific player's point of view, even if it doesn't always seem that way at first glance. For example, Election Game is pretty much told from Jinho's point of view until the plot twist. And I struggle a little to rank and grasp Eunji as a player because I feel like we almost never see games from her point of view. She's often a bit of a free agent and only loosely attached to one or both groups that have aligned for a main match, so there are frequently times when her position in the game is largely brushed over in favor of showing the alliances. Compared to the other players who make it far in the game, we rarely get her thought process, we rarely get her commentary, we rarely get her strategy. So it does feel a bit random when we make it to the top 5 with the 4 biggest characters of the season and Eunji. She's certainly not a strategic mastermind. She struggled to understand Indian poker after watching a full game of it, but I think she's better than is immediately obvious from a casual watch of the show, and I will always hand it to someone who's trying to actively play the game. At number 6, I have Poong. I really debated if I should drop him lower, but I think he's one of the bigger characters of the season, even if his strategic chops were a little all over the place. Personally, he was one of the players I immediately took a liking to when he was fanboying over Sangmin and Gura. He's a type of player I always find endearing, somewhat strategic, but also a little hapless, bumbling around a bit hopelessly at times. But he also has one of the larger swings in strategy across the season, from working with Gura's alliance initially, then hard pivoting over to the big alliance. In many ways, it does kind of feel like he left the dark side to join the good guys, even though I don't actually see the alliances in that light. There were a few times when he showed that he had some decent strategic chops, like when he tried to explain to either Gura or Teacher Cha that there was a better strategy or a flaw in their strategy, but he didn't have the persuasion skills to actually get them to listen to him. That said, he did seem to fare better when he was just a loyal member for an alliance instead of relying on his own skills, because the 2 games he was on his own, Scamming Horse Race and Open Pass, he kind of floundered. In the end, he's in the middle of the list for a reason. He's a decently compelling character and a decent strategist, but is outdone by several other players in pretty much all aspects. Next up in 5th place is Gura. I have a lot of very complicated feelings about Gura. In many ways, he's a character archetype that I don't usually like. We get a couple of these older men who are very stuck in their ways with a bit of a do what I say or else mentality, and that is not a player I usually like at all. That said, for the first half of the season, he is essentially the main character and one of the main strategic driving forces. Even if he's never someone I'm gonna root for personally, he adds so much to the season, and that's something I could never complain about. He's the central figure in the alliance opposing the majority, and he makes some really great plays in the early episodes. Most of my complaints about him manifest in the last couple of episodes he's on. Episodes 5 and 6, you can really tell he's not into it anymore. In episode 5, he's kinda just there. He sits off to the side when he arrives and is called a sulking old man, and he's barely a blip on the radar in Scamming Horse Race. We're really not shown anything about his strategy, and he doesn't seem to be making any moves apart from speaking to his ally Sangmin. And then in Catch the Burglar, the following episode, he forces his team into making strategic blunders and then complains about potentially stooping to the level of playing rock, paper, scissors to survive. Respectfully, if you're not going to play the genius to its fullest extent, I don't really want to watch you play it at all. You're not here to protect your image, you're here to play a social strategy game. Like with Teacher Cha, I'm glad he played the game. I love what he did when he was there, and I'm glad he left the game exactly when he did, because I did not need his bad attitude bringing down the mood any longer. Before we move into the top 4, it feels necessary to stop down for a moment and acknowledge them as a whole, because there's a massive trench between the rest of the players of the season and our top 4. Not only are my top 4 players the top 4 players of the season, but they're also 4 of my favorite genius players of all time. I think this top 4 is incredibly stacked, and I found them nearly impossible to rank. It feels absolutely criminal to put one of them in 4th place. So to put them in an order, I did what I thought was the fairest possible thing, and I ranked them first by who I think played the best game, then again by my favorite, and I averaged out the rankings. There ended up still being a tie between 2nd and 3rd, but I found that tie fairly easy to break. I'm still pretty conflicted about the order they ended up in, and I think there's a valid argument for almost any order you could put these 4 in, but this is the order I've gone with, so let's jump into this top 4. So, 4th place, and breaking my heart, deeply hurting me, is my second favorite player of the entire season. It's Jinho. Yeah, I ended up having to put the winner of the season in 4th place. I promise this hurts me more than it hurts you, because the entire way through the first watch of the show, I was rooting so hard for this man. I've heard some people refer to him as a bit boring, but I find him very likable. He's a nerdy gamer who's a bit hapless and awkward at times, and I find that very endearing. But on this rewatch, I think I really saw for the first time how all over the place he can be as a player. I feel like he's presented and perceived as this very steady, solid player, but I think that's mostly owed to his more low-key personality. In reality, he kind of swings wildly between brilliant strategies for winning main matches and totally fumbling and ending up in the deathmatch. He's tied with Yuram and Eunji for the most deathmatch appearances, but like Yuram, he was in all of them thanks to losing, not being picked. correct. That is not a great track record. Also, despite not being the deathmatch candidate, he was the head strategist for Team Yuram in the election game, which leads to one of her deathmatch appearances, so there's an argument for considering that another loss for him. Ultimately, I think his weakness is that he's seen as a big strategic threat, but doesn't have the social skills to endear himself to the other players in order to protect his threat level the way that Sangmin and Kyungran are able to. So people are willing to leave him out in the cold and toss him to the proverbial wolves like they did in Open Pass. He was able to overcome that in Open Pass, but not in some other games like Expression Auction. This may sound contradictory given that he's last in my top 4, but I do think that he feels like the correct winner of the season. Overcoming the sad legend of second place is such a great underdog story, and adding on his occasionally transcendent gameplay really makes him feel like the correct winner. As I mentioned earlier, second and third place tied in my mini ranking of the top 4, and I broke it in favor of the person who I think was the best player of the season, so Sangmin ends up in third place. What an absolutely transcendent character within reality TV. I'm well aware that I don't love him quite as much as some other people. For context, I have him third in my favorite ranking and second in my gameplay ranking, but he's absolutely the biggest character of the season, and I think he's one of the people who really sets the tone for what the Genius is and will be in future seasons. I think most of us who are still here in the year of our Lord 2025, still fans of the Genius, can pinpoint the exact moment we fell in love with the show, and it's the Garnet heist. In hindsight, it's not even really that big of a strategic move, but it really sets him apart as a character and sets him up as the one to watch out for. And he consistently delivered moments like this throughout the season. I think the epitome of Sangmin as a player is in Kong's Dilemma. Watching him go back and forth betraying literally everyone is so much fun. It's such a great moment for the show in terms of entertainment. But characteristically, in the end, it gets him absolutely nowhere and ends up just being entertainment for the sake of entertaining. And I think that's Sangmin in a nutshell. He won't always be the best player, but it will be flashy gameplay, and he will always entertain you and make good TV, and I'll never complain about that. As for his actual gameplay, Sangmin is a player who really relies on his social game and intuition, but has a decent mind for strategy to support it. Along with Sunggyu, he's the player who really sticks with Gura even when he's a bit of a sinking ship, but he also has the social game to be able to integrate himself into the other side and become a trusted ally of players like Kyungran. I think that's Sangmin's most impressive skill, his ability to be a known backstabber and traitor and still have people willing to trust him. It's absolutely wild the way a player will call him out as a traitor just for that same player to align with him and trust him moments later. At the end of the day, I think Sangmin deserves credit for being the biggest character of the season and a good player on top of that. And I will once again reiterate how criminal it is that I'm forced to rank this top 4 against each other. Moving on to second place. I have always been a huge fan of this top 4, but this rewatch really boosted my opinion of the gameplay of this top 2 in my ranking in particular. So I think that I can finally say with my whole chest that I am a true Kyung stan. Kyungran, in my opinion, is the best game player in the Genius Season 1. Period. She is unfortunately number 4 in my favorite ranking because she's up against 3 absolutely massive characters, but I love her so much. There's a reason Kyungran doesn't go to a deathmatch until Final 3. She's such a solid, consistent, dependable player. The only time she gets totally duped is in Election Game. She has a couple of other tiny slips here and there in the season, but none of them lead to her losing or going to a deathmatch. She's reliably able to integrate herself into an alliance as one of the strategic leaders and lead her group to victory. She's also a player who's willing to barge in and insert herself into a strategic conversation, and one of the few who can sometimes get away with it without being pushed out. And although there are a lot of mentions of her piercing gaze or her being scary, no one is ever really so threatened by her that they try to take her out, despite her constantly being dominant both strategically and socially. Unfortunately, I do think there's a level of misogyny to this. I think that's made clear in some of the comments made to and about her throughout the season. But listen, if the men want to screw themselves over by underestimating the most competent player of the season so that she forges her path to the finale without a huge threat level, I'm not about to stop them. Her weakest point is probably her deathmatch skill, but she's no slouch in those either. She beats Sangmin fairly easily and finds herself against probably the best strategic mind, Jinho, in the 2 finale deathmatches. So that's only barely a knock to her at all. She just performs better when using her social game and strategic game in tandem, and deathmatches are often heavily reliant on strategy. I think there are plenty other players in the season that she could have trounced in a deathmatch. I think she probably beat Sangmin in a final 2, but she unfortunately got stuck with Jinho instead. She's not the flashiest or most dominant player or character, but I do think she's very handily the best, most solid player of the season. And obviously this means that I have put Sunggyu at number 1. Being perfectly honest, I didn't expect him to end up in first place when I started making this list, and I really wouldn't have expected him in first place before this rewatch. Obviously, I knew he was my favorite player of the season. Sunggyu is the reason I got into K-pop after watching The Genius. I loved him on the show, and so I obviously had to go look up his K-pop group Infinite. And now I've been deep into the K-pop fandom and have been a fan of him as a musician for 8 years. So he's someone I've become a fan of outside of the game in a way that I haven't really for any other players. So they kinda don't stand a chance of beating him as my favorite. Side note, genuinely, Sunggyu is one of the best vocalists in K-pop, and his group Infinite has a ton of absolute bangers. You should definitely go check them out if you haven't already. But this rewatch of the season really made me see his gameplay in a new light, and I was really impressed. As you can probably tell from what I've said about the other players, I don't think he's the best game player of the season. I have him at 3 behind Sangmin and Kyungran, but I found that he had a much higher level of agency than I think I've given him credit for in the past. He's a very self-interested player to a much higher degree than almost anyone else in the season, and I think he gets away with it largely due to the other players seeing him as a bit of a doofus little brother character. And let's be honest, that's absolutely what he was in episode 1. Bro was lost and confused and did not know what he was doing. But as the season progressed, he caught on very quickly and began to succeed on his own merit to the point that he'd become the most dominant player by the episode he was eliminated. And let's be so clear, I am still upset with how he was eliminated. Sure, he shouldn't have brought his CEO, but if Sunggyu had been the one making the moves, he would have survived. And he did absolutely everything in his power to save himself once he knew he was in trouble, which also leads to my absolute favorite segment in the entirety of The Genius Season 1 when he's passing notes to Sangmin, declaring his love to him, throwing garnets. It's a delight. So he earns first place in my player ranking, and I remain absolutely gutted that we never got to see him play another season. So that is my ranking of all of the players of The Genius Season 1. Like I said, this was an absolute nightmare to try to do, especially those top 4. That hurt my heart and soul. As I mentioned at the beginning, I am in the middle of a full rewatch, so next up will be my main match rankings of Season 2, and then the player rankings for Season 2. And full transparency, I'm already working on both the main match and player rankings for Season 2, and it is proving to be a lot more difficult than Season 1. In many ways and for many reasons, but I'll save all that for those 2 rankings, which should be up pretty soon. I think the schedule I'm going to try to keep to with this is to get the main match ranking out near the end of the week, Thursday, Friday-ish, and the matching season player ranking out near the beginning of the next week, Monday, Tuesday-ish. That way I get through this entire little mini-series in a tight little 4-week period while the Genius Game UK is still airing. For a little behind the scenes, I'm currently halfway through my rewatch of Season 2. I'll probably be done with it by the time that this gets posted sometime on Monday or Tuesday. I'm literally about to go watch Season 2, Episode 6 after this, and I'm very excited. If you know, you know. That said, it has been a little bit of a struggle because the beginning of Season 2 is a bit rough. But I'm about to get into the good part with some better games, so that'll be fun. So if you did enjoy this ranking and want to see the other Genius content that I'm currently cooking up, please go ahead and follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're currently listening on. And you can also follow me on Instagram if you want to be kept up to date on upcoming content as well. Link is below. And as always, thank you so much for listening to me as I made some niche references.